Welcome. My name is Natasha Sherman, and I am your host. And my guest today is Sean Pica of Hudson Link. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Natasha.
So I didn't know what Hudson Link was, so I'm just going to kind of talk a little bit about your story, and you can interrupt me at any time. But basically, at the age of 16,
Yep,
you shot and killed someone.
I did.
And were sent to prison for 24 years.
Yep.
And served how many years?
I served 16 of the 24.
Okay. So you go to prison at the age of 16, and you had finished what level of education?
I made it to the 9th grade before I was arrested. New York is one of only 2 states where at the age of 16 you're sentenced as an adult.
Right. So here you go off to prison, 8th, 9th grade education. Had you completed 9th grade?
I completed the 9th grade, yes.
Okay, completed 9th grade. Your parents were both police officers,
Yep,
yes?
yep.
And but none of your family really had a college education.
No.
And so here you are in prison, and for 24 years. And tell us about how you started your education in prison.
Well, I remember like it was yesterday. I got to the cell block and immediately was just feeling very sorry for myself. I mean, how do you possibly, as a teenager, wrap your head around the fact that you're going to be there for the next 2 decades? And while I was sitting in that cell, really wondering how I could possibly live through this, the officer came to the cell and he said to me, do you think you'd consider helping the other men? And I hate to say it, I thought he was being cruel. Like, how could I I'm a teenager, I can't even help myself. How could I possibly help anyone else there? And he said, you don't get it, you're one of the most educated guys around. And I'd only made it to the 9th grade. So he asked if I would go down to the prison library and help the other men learn to read and write. And I never saw myself as a teacher in any kind of capacity, but if you know how to read and write and everyone else doesn't, you're now a teacher. And I went down to this dungeon-like prison library, and there was a stack of children's books in the center of the room. And I just opened the book and read to these other men that were so hungry to learn to read and write, because the only way to communicate with the outside world was a phone call that had to be collected. You could only call home on a collect call. So most of the families couldn't afford to receive those phone calls. Or you could write a letter. And if you didn't know how to learn to read and write, you're now isolated. So prison gets really, all of a sudden, very bad when not only you're living there, but you can't even communicate with your family. So it was my first step in my educational path.
Wow. And I'm going to bounce around a little bit, but the idea of prison is to put people away for having committed a crime. And
as it should be.
Yeah, right. And then the idea is that most of them are coming out. So mostly, in my experience and conversations, it's really, there's no between here preparation for getting a person out and becoming a viable, contributing member to society. It's just, bam, you're in a cage, then one day you're out, and somehow in there, something was supposed to have been learned, but clearly not. And so what happens is the recidivism rate, from what the research I saw, it's anywhere, depending on what state, 40 to 60% within 3 years.
Yeah. So that means that the men and women return to prison within the first 3 years they're home at a 60% rate. New York does a little bit of a better job. New Jersey does a pretty good job as well at lowering that rate. But if the average is about 55 to 65%, none of us are doing a very good job.
I saw this statistic on your website that we have 5% of the world's population, but 25% of our population is in prison.
Yeah.
That's stunning.
It's stunning,
And then that the New York budget in 2014 for corrections was $3-point-something billion.
It is an industry. There is an industry that's been born out of this criminal justice segment in our population. But I think the funny part for me is, as we've seen it grow, the one thing that we knew that affected that, the recidivism rates, is the educational component.
Right.
And that's the one thing that the Crime and Corrections Bill took away. So the one thing that we knew that lowered recidivism statistically has been removed from the equation. So the educational programs are now gone. The only college programs that are left are ones like like ours that are privately funded, no state and federal funding.
So let's backtrack a little. So now you're in prison and you're teaching grown men how to read. And then at that time, there was education available in the prison?
There were.
And you were in Sing Sing?
And well, no, I started out in Elmira.
Okay.
I was in 9 different maximum security prisons over 16 years. Sing Sing was the last. I served my last 9 years at Sing Sing. When I got to Elmira, one of the officers said to me, there is college here if you would, were you interested. And I thought, why not? It's free, I can go, and quite frankly, the only thing I thought I would get out of it is the fact that I'd be able to tell my family that I'm doing something positive. Mm-hmm. There's not a lot you can give your family from prison. So I thought if I could tell my parents, hey, I'm in college, I'm doing something positive, it would be something good to give back. And I was probably in the program for 2 years before I really understood the fact that I was changing and didn't even know it. I was thinking differently, reacting differently. I was becoming a different person, and that was really good for me and for my environment. The new commissioner in New York has made it very clear that education is a top priority for him and in the 60 prisons in New York. But he's also made it very clear that while recidivism rates don't really affect his job, because he's involved in keeping those 60 prisons safe, not what happens outside. But the prisons are safer if they have college in them. So for him, it makes perfect sense to have a prison of any security level with educational programs or vocational trainings. I mean, there's a link here, and college isn't for everybody. The fact that we're running a college program is great, but there are other forms of education that are just as important. And he's also been a strong component of reentry. That word is the new buzzword. That the fact that doesn't start on your way out the door. So if you're serving 15 years, your reentry starts the day you come in, not the day you go out. And that's changing really the face of corrections in New York.
That's amazing. Because, again, statistically, it costs $60,000 a year to keep an inmate in prison. And then that's not counting the costs of the legal system and all of that. And then when there is such a high recidivism rate, the crimes that are committed cost society. Yep. And in human cost as well. And then they're back in again, and $60,000 a year. Whereas, according to statistics, it costs about $5,000 a year to educate them.
We've had some interesting folks get involved with us, and Harry Belafonte and Tim Robbins and Ice-T, but we also have Steve Forbes and Warren Buffett that have been to the prison and spent time with the guys. And Steve Forbes said, I think it was 2009 at the graduation, it's very easy to measure the financial components here, but how do you measure human equity? And when you look at the 26 men that were graduating with college degrees and their families and their children, and when you have one of those children say to their father, hey, you know what, Dad, if you could do it in here, maybe I could do it in Brooklyn.
Wow.
Maybe I could do it in the Bronx. And we're really changing the face of what we look like in the correctional system, but also how that's impacting the communities we came from that we once hurt.
Yes. So a lot of the people so how many graduates have you, so you got your degree and you got out of prison, and what did you then do? So,
because I had heard so many people over the years say it's great you're going to school, but that's not the same college I went to, and you really start to believe that. And I was very grateful that I got a chance to go to college and get a degree, but I never really thought it would help me. And I went out and went back to what I knew, which is construction. And I was working in East Harlem, and I had a tool bag on my shoulder, and I saw one of the guys I went to school with. And he was in a suit and tie. Mm-hmm. And I swear the first thing I thought was, what the hell is he up to?
Yeah.
But he told me that he was working at Strive International, which is a nonprofit in East Harlem that helps young men and women find employment. And he said, you should come. They would give you a job. Now, of course, if I knew what social workers were earning compared to what I was making in construction, I wouldn't be here today. But I went, and I got a job. It was my first job, and they hired me even with a background, even with a past. And they actually thought that would enhance the work that I was doing with this youth. And I think it was an important step in my reentry to realize that past didn't direct my future.
Wow. I mean, that's pivotal, because most of us carry the thought that we can never escape our past. And I don't mean escape entirely, but it doesn't have to be your future.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
So then how did Hudson Link start?
So I had 118 credits and working towards my bachelor's degree when the programs were all taken away, when Governor Pataki took the Pell and Tap out of the correctional institutions. Overnight, about 300 programs evaporated. And I remember like it was yesterday, the schools coming in to pack up their textbooks and leave. And it was horrible, but it was also, I never really saw myself as a college graduate. So I was very proud that I'd gone that far. And then some of the men that already had their degrees, they started fighting to bring they didn't fight. They started advocating. Mm-hmm. They were advocating to bring college back. And they knew that I had 118 credits and no degree, so they thought I would be one of the first. So they kept me in this discussion to create a college program. And I literally watched these men at Sing Sing create a college program with no money, no email, no phone. And I watched it get built. And the superintendent at the time, which was Brian Fisher, was very instrumental in just allowing us to have these conversations and then supporting them when it came to a point of Nyack College coming in and creating a degree-granting college program, which 16 of us graduated from in 2001.
Wow. Wow. And so now you've lost your government funding.
Yes.
And so it's all private donations.
Every single penny.
So, and again, I watched some video clips that showed graduation.
Yeah.
And, one of the things that was really touching was in some of the interviews of the teachers. And the teachers say, these are the best students I've ever had.
Yeah.
Because they work harder, they're hungrier for knowledge. And then hearing the graduates talk about how they no longer experienced themselves or saw the world in the same way.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the key to being a different human being when you walk out, is not seeing the world the same way, not seeing your options the same way, but seeing different options. So for me, it was so touching and compelling. And somebody said, all you have to do is change what you think, and education changes what you think. So, sometimes the argument is, how come they're getting a college degree? My kid can't get a college degree.
Yeah.
And it's a valid argument from one perspective, because everybody wants their kid to go to college.
Sure.
But most people who go into prison come out. And unless they're getting educated, then really it impacts the entire society. So it kind of makes sense.
95% of the men in New York Department of Corrections are returning to their communities. And if they've done nothing but lift weights and play basketball for 15 years, they're not only coming back, but they're coming back worse than when they went in. These men and women that are educated, that are returning to their communities, are returning as role models. So it's not just about affecting their one life in the direction of what they're going to do with their life, but it affects the whole community. Because these young men and women listen to these formerly incarcerated people, and they look at them as role models, and they see education as a different kind of weapon. And they put the drugs, they put the weapons down, and they pick up a textbook instead. And for the most part, the communities have never been able to do that. And it's making us pivotal in how these communities are reacting to this, but also in breaking these cycles of recidivism.
Yeah. And I saw one of the guys say that he was smart when he was a kid, but it wasn't cool to be smart.
No.
So he kept suppressing it. And then what became more powerful was being accepted and being one of the guys. So he set all of that aside.
Yeah. I think that one of the funny parts that is the reverse of that is, as they start going to school at Sing Sing, if you don't participate in the classroom, that the students will notice that. And you're expected to participate even if you don't have the right answer. And at the end of class, we'll say, hey, Natasha, what's happening? Is everything okay? Because you don't seem to be participating. Were you not prepared? Is there something going on with the family? And all of a sudden, what's born out of that is this social services component. We become caseworkers and social workers. So when our men and women go home, they don't go into the business world. They become caseworkers, service providers, HIV/AIDS counselors, and it's very interesting. We've filled this gap or this void in New York City. It's the who's who of the social services field now.
Wow. Were any of the other inmates, so what was the criteria to get an education, and then do any of the other inmates resent you for getting an
I
education?
get that question every single time I speak with somebody because they just assume that there was some big muscular guy knocking the textbooks out of my hand as Skinny Sean went through the halls of Sing Sing. It was just the opposite. I gained a respect that I probably would have not gotten in any other way as I went through the halls, because guys knew that I was in this pilot program. And if I succeeded, it would open the door for these other men. And it was interesting how that respect then got translated into when I graduated, the superintendent asked if I would be the liaison between the next group of students and his office, which made me pretty powerful in that place. And it also showed the power of education. And it created this venue for the program to grow and grow and grow. And when I became director, there was 60 students in Sing Sing alone. And now a few years later, we have almost 400 men and women in 5 different facilities with 5 different college partners. And an award-winning documentary on HBO called The University of Sing Sing. And now PBS is releasing a brand new film called First Degree.
Wow. So tell me a little bit about the documentary that we're going to be showing on this station called 0%.
So 0% was created by Moxie Pictures. They shot 500 hours in 2 facilities in New York about the educational program. HBO then bought that picture, which I believe it finished airing on HBO at the end of 2014. This piece that we're showing on our station now is a director's cut. So it's 57 minutes, and it really captures the essence of why education changes people.
Right. So just before the show ends, we're going to show a trailer of that documentary, and then we'll be airing the documentary, and I invite people to watch. So, talk about you personally in terms of who are you now that you weren't then?
I think when I look back at where I was at 16 and how I got into trouble and why I got into trouble and how confused I was, like any 16-year-old really knows what they're doing, but I made some pretty poor choices. It's hard for me to envision who that kid was. I got my master's from New York Theological Seminary in Professional Studies, which was basically urban theology, and I got a second master's in social work from Hunter College, and I'm currently working on my MBA.
For someone who wasn't college, didn't perceive himself as college material.
And I think when I look back at that kid in the 9th grade that always struggled in school, that it wasn't the school that was giving me the problems, it was how I learned. And I think as I go back, a lot of the students go back with me now that they're home and we speak at high schools. And the message that we say is if you're struggling right now, it's not the schoolwork that's giving you the trouble, it's how you look at the schoolwork. And we try to craft a message that helps them look at school a little differently. And that if I can do it, anyone can do it.
So your attitude towards school at that time was?
I just was struggling. And why bother? I wasn't ever going to go to college. I wasn't ever going to... And ironically, on the construction site, when I first came home from prison, I used my education more on the construction site than I did anywhere else in my life. Because education is not about what degree you have, it's about how you communicate, how you interact with other people. It's about life. And that really was translated very clearly as I needed to get a job and communicate with other people and traverse through that community.
It's interesting because we just had a conversation with someone who was a guest also, who was in the military for 30 years in Afghanistan and Iraq, and I didn't know this, but one of the first things they do to the detainees, is educate them.
Yeah.
So it's pretty interesting because clearly the concept is if you educate them, because a lot of it is just poverty and illiteracy that has them become, insurgents.
Yeah.
And so educating them.
Yeah.
So on the one hand, you would think the military knows this. How come the prison systems don't kind of have that same immediate mentality?
Yeah, I think it's funny because Doris Buffett has been involved for several years now. She's our #1 supporter, and she's such a proud supporter of what we do that recently she was on a plane somewhere and sat next to Julian Bond. and immediately started telling him about Hudson Link, and he's now going to be the keynote speaker at our graduation at Sing Sing in June. But if you think about how we're linked with other people, that's really what education is. And now he's proudly coming to speak at our graduation, and it's just connecting different people with different venues in life, and it's amazing to me.
And you know, it's interesting because essentially, I think at the core, all we want is to be connected.
Yeah.
And then we lose our connection, whatever it is that interrupts that along the way.
Yeah.
And then if you warehouse people, again, the connection is not developed. As a matter of fact, it's more disconnected.
Yeah.
And yet, if you just bring in ideas and actually teach people the gift of reading, which we take so for granted, so that then they can expand their ideas, and then all of a sudden you have people coming out ready to contribute to the community, it kind of is mind-boggling. It seems so simple.
We recently hosted the first TEDx event ever in a New York State prison, and we had several speakers, Hill Harper and Ice-T, and Jonathan Demme filmed it for us, but Gina Belafonte spoke about identity. And when she spoke about how she grew up and how she formulated her identity, and I mean, her father's Harry Belafonte, you'd think that that should be an easy thing for her. But when she spoke about her own struggles with her identity, and with this population that always struggled with their identity, it was just a seamless connection there, and it was such a cool event too. And the men on the inside that coordinated and ran the entire event, it was amazing to see, and many folks said it was one of the best TEDx events they'd ever been to. Wow.
And it is our shared humanity.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, one of the things is that when you, I remember researching, and they asked someone who went into the prison, did you ever feel threatened? And it was like, once the door closed, it was like, it never occurred to me that there wasn't a corrections officer present.
Yeah.
They were so hungry for ideas and for knowledge. And I think for me, the message is, it's so easy to turn our back on a segment of the population. We do it all the time. You know, them versus us.
Yeah.
And we have so much them versus us. And it's very easy to ignore the fact that a large segment of the population is locked away. We don't have to think about them.
Yeah.
But the reality is they're coming back.
When I tell people about what I do and how I do it and the population I work with, people will say to me, well, why would you help those people? And they don't realize that I'm one of those people.
I am those people, yeah. So we have 1 minute left. What is it that you would like to say to the world?
I think for me it was, people talk to me and hear me speak about what we do and how we do it, and they say, well, he must be the exception. But the fact is, I was the kid that struggled in school. I was not a star pupil, and the fact that I'm now coordinating this whole program and have 400 students and it's growing, and that's fantastic, but there are a lot of men and women just like me that just want to get a chance to show everyone that they have some good, it's good to give and potential back in their communities, and I'm excited that that's actually happening already, but I would like others to know about it.
That's great. Thank you. So we're going to show the
Excellent.
clip from the documentary.
%60 of all the men and women released from prison return to prison in the first 3 years. So statistically, your odds of succeeding are very small.
I have been in and out of the system since I was 8 years old. My mother had me when she was relatively young. She was 17 years old. My father was in prison since I was 5 years old, and he was never around when he was out of prison.
Well, when I first came to Sing Sing and I went to B Block, it's just like this feeling that came over me. It was dark, it was dirty, it was gloomy, and I remember that night silently crying to myself, like, oh man, what did I do to myself? I am I gonna do with my life? I have 20 years, I don't wanna do it.
We know that the best opportunity for an individual who's coming out of a correctional facility is going to be a college degree.
I came a long way from being in the streets, being a destructive young man with no high school diploma, to coming to prison, and I'm becoming a positive role model to a lot of the young guys in the school building.
It has given me a new set of glasses. Before, I wasn't able to see the things that I see now. I mean, I was a 19-year-old knucklehead going around thinking I knew it all. The more I learn, the more I can sense how wrong I was, how many things I didn't know.
We teach the very same things that we teach in the normal campuses at Dobbs Ferry or Manhattan. It's just that it's at Sing Sing instead of at the main campus, but it's the very same classes, the same teachers, the same syllabus. Better students, that's the biggest difference, better students.
We got about 50 guys out, maybe a little less than 50 guys that are actually in the street in 10 years. For the most part, they're more successful than guys that have been here the whole time they've been in prison.
What a chance Hudson Link gave me. I mean, what a chance Hudson Link is giving to so many men.
There is a point. This isn't just a gift for them, it's a gift for society. It's a way that we make society a better place.
My name is Sean Pica. I'm the Executive Director of Hudson Link for Higher Education. We operate one of the only college degree granting programs in the entire Department of Corrections in New York State.
I really hope that particularly this college program would get some publicity someplace. I mean, I don't think anybody knows anything about it to speak of.
My name is Natasha Sherman. Thank you for joining us. Sean, thank you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.